We have talked about memes already. The ideas that are replicated from one person to the other without having necessary a content, a way that you can pass on certain forms of ideas, such as the urban legends or even the drawings that are the more modern forms of memes as they have been identified on the internet. And you could ask the question if something such as money is a meme, for example. This is a description that used to appear on the Treasury's website of how US currency works. Federal Reserve notes are not redeemable in gold, silver, or any other commodity. They receive no backing by anything. Redeemable notes into gold entered in 1933 and silver in 1968. The notes have no value for themselves, but for what they will buy. In another sense, because they are legal tender, Federal Reserve notes are backed by all the goods and the services in the economy. So again, if you think of an idea that replicates itself because we generally understand it as basically true, again, such as the urban legends, the idea that you can pay for things using banknotes, using pieces of paper that are printed that say that they are worth a certain amount, seem to be working kind of like a meme. And this is, in fact, one of the reasons why you have people like Newt Gingrich, Ron Paul, Ted Cruz to seek to reconnect the US currency with gold. That being said, of course, gold is only worth what people are going to pay for it, rather than a straightforward value. In other words, the price of gold changes just as much as the price of the dollar changes, just based on different units. Now, the larger idea behind this is, of course, that money is worth what people want it to be. And a good idea that we can get from that is, for example, when the southern states broke away from the United States and created the Confederate States of America, they started their own currency, the Confederate dollars, which was supposed to be worth exactly the same as a US dollar, of course. By the end of the Civil War, the price of one Confederate dollar was about 15 cents. So meaning that the value of the Confederate dollar was worth almost nothing because there was no economic backing for it. Because the only economy that the South had at the time was agricultural, it was not what the power of the US dollar was. And of course, as a result of that, we have been thinking about ways in which the money and the value of things could be designed in different ways. And this is very much an anthropological subject if you think of it as a creation by humans. The newest development in this is exemplified by Bitcoin and essentially what are called cryptocurrencies. The reading that is posted on the Blackboard and Perusal is the paper that kind of lays out the system behind Bitcoin, the very technical terms, as some of you noticed, very abstract ways, but the most important parts are laid out right at the beginning there. The thinking behind it is that the completely non-reversible transactions are not really possible since financial institutions cannot avoid mediating disputes. In other words, if somebody is unhappy with their purchase, they should be able to get their money back. So you need to be able to have money going both ways if you are going to use money. Now, the cost of mediation increases transaction costs, limiting the minimum practical transaction size and cutting off the possibility for small casual transactions. And there is a broader cost in the loss of ability to make non-reversible payments for non-reversible services. Something that you may have experienced, for example, if you try to pay by card under a certain amount, there are some businesses that do not allow you to do this. Now, with the possibility of reversal, the need for trust spreads. Merchants must be wary of their customers, hassling them for more information than they would otherwise need. A certain percentage of fraud is accepted as unavoidable. These costs and payment uncertainties can be avoided in person by using physical currency, but no mechanism exists to make payments over a communications channel without a trusted party. What is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any two willing parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party. So right here is the crux of how Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies work, right? You are removing the trusted third party from the picture, and the assumption is that you have a trusted second party, the person that you are working with. You can think of whether or not you trust others with your money, and especially strangers, but I suppose this is a question that is more cultural than a practical reason why Bitcoin was started. Now, the idea behind all this of the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin especially is that you have a certain amount of coding that happens. Once again, we have codes that are designed to make sure that people are passing down information about the currency that they are using. And once again, Bitcoin is worth nothing besides what people say it does. In other words, the value of a Bitcoin is about the same as the value of a dollar. Just so happens that you don't question what the dollar is worth because for the most part, you use dollars everywhere and you don't have to think about it too much, as opposed to Bitcoin, especially when Bitcoin is worth a lot of money as it is now. In other words, there's a much bigger investment into getting one Bitcoin that there is in a dollar, even though, of course, the 1-to-1 ratio doesn't apply because nothing is typically worth one Bitcoin, but you get the idea. Now, the general principle behind Bitcoin is what people call a consensus mechanism. So consensus mechanism means that there are mechanisms that allow for people who agree with the mechanism for the coin to work. The consensus mechanism is a code, and the code has a protocol associated with it, and it also has ways to ensure that the protocols are followed. In this case, the protocols are followed by the fact that people have a reward for checking the code. So if you are involved in using Bitcoin as a person, you use that because it has a certain value that is defined by the people that are using Bitcoin. If you are part of the Bitcoin network as a active member, again, we're kind of rekindling our connection with what we have talked about before with the zappers and the casuals and whatever. Well, in this case, the zappers are just using Bitcoin. The loyals are checking the code, and they are the creators of Bitcoin somewhere out there. But so if you are checking the code, you are rewarded with the coin. If you are using the coin, you are just using the coin. If you are a creator of the coin, you make sure that this entire system is working through a ledger. So essentially, you have a big book that is kept somewhere, a computer, that checks that coins are not spent twice. And in other words, when somebody does a transaction with somebody else, the coin needs to be returned to the ledger to see that this is the same coin. The code is decrypted, then the coin can be sent back to the other person that needs it. So you kind of have this one intermediary between the person that is spending the coin and the person that is receiving the coin. So the transfer of value happens when the coin successfully goes through this entire system where you have one person who has a wallet, that wallet is encrypted, then it is decrypted by the system, then it is re-encrypted to the other person who then decrypts it, then the last person re-encrypts it. In other words, you have this entire system that makes sure, allegedly, that the system is going to be worth the effort of checking that code and of going through all of that trouble. Now, of course, this is only possible because we have very powerful computers now. And indeed, at this point in time, running a system such as Bitcoin requires enormous amounts of processing power, which also requires enormous amounts of energy. And this is one of the biggest criticisms of stuff like Bitcoin now, but this is not really our issue right now. Our issue right now is really how this is solving any problem. It is not particularly different from a US dollar, besides the fact that you are not involving a central bank or maybe a central government. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to next week. The biggest flaw that exists in Bitcoin is what people tend to call 51% attacks. So there's a coin that is related to Bitcoin called Bitcoin SV that suffered one of those 51% attacks just last year. The idea of a 51% attack is that you have over 50% of the number of people that are using the coin who are actively working against it. So usually in this case by preventing the code from being checked or from making sure that the coins are actually going through the entire process from one person to the other. So here, the 51% attack, an invasion of a bit of a blockchain by miners who gain control of more than half of the network's computing power, could enable the intruders to prevent new transactions from gaining confirmations, thus giving them the power to stop payments between some or all users or double spend coins, which, kind of defeats the purpose of how this coin works, right? This, of course, creates a big loss in the trust for the network, which also causes a big loss in the value of the Bitcoin itself. And once again, you can think of this as a pretty normal function of how things work if you think of over half of the system failing. So if over half of the system of your car fails, you will have a hard time driving it. If you have over half of the system of your computer working, your computer will not serve its purpose. Well, the same thing works for Bitcoin in that context, of course. Now, you could think of it on the much larger idea. If you have 51% of your worth that is disappearing from under your feet, obviously you will not trust it anymore, and you will no longer use that certain part of your life in that case, mostly because you have lost it, right? So the larger idea behind this is, of course, that people need to be able to trust their network, trust the Bitcoin as a whole, and leading to the creation of different identifications, such as the Bitcoin SV, for example, which was recognized up until that point as a stable coin, a coin that would not suffer such attacks. One way to fix that is a newer development that has happened in the cryptocurrency world, started by Ethereum in 2022, which is actually just last month or a couple of months ago, when it's instead of using a code to check to check the transactions, they use a system of stake. So they explain it here. Proof of stake underlines certain consensus mechanisms used by blockchains. Again, that's the consensus mechanism we talked about a second ago, to achieve distributed consensus. In other words, in the system, you have the agreement that people subscribe to that the coin is going to work a certain way. Now, in proof of work, miners, people who mine the code that allows for the confirmation of the coins, prove that they have capital at risk by expending energy. So you spend your computing energy by checking the code, and like I said, you get a reward for it. Ethereum uses proof of stake, where validators explicitly stake capital in the form of Ethereum into a smart contract on Ethereum. This staked coin, ETH, that's the name of the coin, then acts as collateral that can be destroyed if the validator behaves dishonestly or lazily. The validator is then responsible for checking that new blocks propagated over the network are valid and occasionally creating and propagating new blocks themselves. So instead of having the code being checked by anyone or everyone, you have the possibility of putting a certain amount of money, a certain amount of coin, a certain amount of stake into the game, showing that you are committed to the system, showing that you can be trusted by the system to do this work. Now, of course, this does not eliminate the risk of a 51% attack. It just means that you need to have even more money involved into the system to make the system work, which, of course, means that if you are putting this money at stake and you compromise the system, that means you are losing money. And of course, you are losing the energy that goes into saving this. So people will lose a whole lot more by compromising the system. So they would have to involve a lot of money into it. They would also have to lose a whole lot of money into it. So it kind of eliminates, or is supposed to, once again, eliminates the fact that's, if you can make sure that this system is honestly run. And again, this becomes a matter of trust once again. And so this is the new meme economy as it has been described in the last few years, especially because cryptocurrency is considered to be a meme. Currency has always been structured around fundamentals, whether it be precious metals, governmental powers, or advantage in commerce. The reduction of major currencies to untethered fiat currencies has brought about a transformative reaction in the form of cryptocurrency. So as we mentioned from the beginning, untethered fiat currencies such as the US dollars, which is not tied to metals, to governmental powers, or to an advantaged commerce, is based on the trust that people have into the US government, has forced people or led people to look for alternatives, and cryptocurrency is preventing this alternative, is giving people this idea that they can use their money in ways that are outside of the government system, outside of the value of things, and essentially, once again, kind of putting people in control of their own money. Now, that also means that if there is no control centralized, that also means that there's no trust as well. This is an example of the curve for Bitcoin as it happened over the course of 3 months, where it started just below $14,000, raised to just below $18,000, and within a month fell down to about $500. Of course, because if a bunch of people believe in the coin and believe that it works, the system will work. If a bunch of people lose trust in the coin, lose trust that it works, well, the value collapses with that. Oh, I'm sorry. I just posted this slide, but this is what happened in 2018, sorry. This is what happened in 2022. The same process, of course, except now Bitcoin is worth about $47,000 and it fell down to 35 over the course of a month once again. And of course, it has gone up and down very widely in the meantime. And as you can see, when you get back to the month of April, we are back to about the same value as it was in the beginning of January. So, of course, this is a matter of, once again, trust, but the trust in the system as it works. If you trust that the US government is working the way you thought it did, then, of course, the value that you have for the US dollar is working the way that you think it does. If you trust that the cryptocurrency system is working the way that you think it did, then, of course, the cryptocurrency is working as you think it does. But this is a matter of the number of people that are involved in here. And of course, these networks are anonymous. They are decentralized for a reason. And as a result of that, it becomes a lot more difficult for the principle of people being able to know what the future of these coins are, as opposed to knowing what the future of the US dollar is, because you have pretty clear idea of how the future of the US as a country is going and how the future of the rest of the world is going as a result of that. So having this publicly distributed amount of news about certain places means that you have a general broad idea of how things work. Having no such publicly available information about who is involved in new currency also means that you have to guess how the system is going to work. And of course, that leads to pretty big risks as a result of this.